Welcome to the Republican Professor. Today we have an amazing special guest, Senior Chief Gabe Morris, United States Navy, retired. Thank you for being here, Gabe.
Yes, good to be with you, Luke. Thank you so much for having us on here. Hopefully I'm okay to call you Luke because that's all I've ever known you as. So you don't have to call me Senior Chief, and I won't I won't remember to call you Professor. So we'll be good.
Now, did you ever see the film G.I. Jane?
Oh yes, I did.
Okay, I'm sorry to bring up those painful memories, but I don't know why I was thinking of that film. I think I watched it recently. Again, I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know. No. There's a Master Chief in the film. And I don't know who the knuckleheads they had on as far as consultants go on the set. I mean, on so many things. I mean, where do you start? But just like such a basic thing is they called the Master Chief many times.
Yeah,
and every time I just was cringing once. And it's like, you idiots. That's okay. So the difference between a chief and a senior chief is a pretty big deal. The difference between a senior chief and a master chief is a big deal. The difference between a master chief and a chief is a big friggin' deal. It would be like as idiotic as calling a commander lieutenant.
Yes.
Because it's two ranks. And
yes,
when you get up to the higher ranks, it kind of makes a difference, I think.
Yes. And Master Chiefs eat people for breakfast. So
yeah. Anyway, so if people don't, first of all, Hollywood, if you're listening, idiots. And then secondly, everybody else, this is a senior chief. So tell us what a senior chief is.
Yeah, so in the services, every service sort of has a separation of its senior enlisted folks. You've got, of course, got enlisted and officer. You're enlisted and officer. Actually, Lucas and I served together as enlisted in Hawaii, and so that's really our history to be, to bring about full disclosure. In those enlisted ranks, when you get up in the Navy to the E7 through E9 grades, that's the top of the top of the pyramid when it comes to the enlisted side. And so it goes E1 through E9. So E7, E8, and E9 for us is set apart differently. We dress differently. It's they dine in separate places. They hang out with separate groups. You're not allowed to hang out with people below that or people above that socially. And so they're their own group. And so senior chief is E8, right there smack dab in between chief and master chief.
So the highest you can get is master chief on the enlisted side, and you were one below that.
That's right.
E8. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So by numbers, because that was my last job in the military, I was a personnel guy. As I was finishing things up, you get to a point where they want you to tell other people what to do instead of just doing yourself. And so by numbers, which I had to submit routinely, 1% of the enlisted force is master chief. It's reserved for 1% of the enlisted force, E9 across any of the services. And then 2.5% or 2.25%, somewhere between that is what E8 is across all services.
Cool.
I'm ready.
So Gabe, I met you, man. It's hurting my brain how long ago it was. How long ago?
Well,
almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, I can remember it pretty clearly. Actually, I met you at the same time as I met my wife. Each of us heading to
now. This is your
church
first wife.
Yeah, my first and only.
Your first. Yes. Oh, your first and only. Okay.
Yes, that's right. So yes, I guess also my first wife. But they know each other. They're friends. It's great. But in any case, we met on our way to church. If you'll remember, Mr. Plott picking us up in a van and taking all of us to I guess what was it, Carmel Valley Baptist Church, I think is what it was at the time.
That's right.
Yep. And so so I met my wife on that, and that's basically all. I didn't know anything of her except that when I saw her, I turned to my roommate It was a Vietnamese linguist, and I said, I'm going to marry that lady. And sure enough, I did. But then when I got on the van, or it was a Volkswagen bus, there you were. And so we met, I guess that would have been 1994, probably early 1994 when we first met, maybe late 1993.
Okay. Did you get there in 93? Do you remember?
I got there. I graduated boot camp late 93. So
Okay.
I think it was September of 93 when I graduated. Yeah.
Okay. So that's actually very helpful for me. Because I'm trying to think of where I met Lieutenant Plott, and Lieutenant Plott was a student at the Naval Postgraduate School at the time.
That's right.
Which is in the city of Monterey, California. And I was stationed at the time on the Presidio of Monterey, California, at an Army, it's an Army base called Army school called the Defense Language Institute. Actually, it's a Department of Defense school, but it's run by the Army. At least it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a Vietnamese linguist right in the middle of that, talking about where we were going to church, and you mentioned Carmel Valley. So there was a few little details people were like probably wondering, what the heck does Vietnamese have to do with going to a church in Carmel Valley? So what did you mean by that? What did you mean by Carmel Valley Baptist and there's a Vietnamese linguist there? You mean there was a Vietnamese guy in the van?
No. So the way it worked at the Defense Language Institute, of course, and you lived in the same barracks as I did at that time, as I recall. But yeah, the way it worked is we were all housed together, regardless of what language you happened to have been. We were all within a couple of buildings of each other. Really all of us going through schooling, learning foreign languages, so that we could head out into the fleet, as it were, to do our jobs in different places. And so yeah, my roommate at the time was going through Vietnamese language school, and I at the time was going through Tagalog language school. So Tagalog, for those who don't know, is a language that is spoken even today in the Philippines. It is probably the primary language. I would say, folks who are actually from the Philippines get a little disgruntled if you call it Filipino, because there are so many dialects spoken there, and each of them just as valid, has a claim to Filipino as Tagalog. But Tagalog is what they sent me through. I can give you a little backstory to that. How I ended up in Tagalog is I took a test like we all did, and we take this test with a fake language. There are rules made up about a fake language that tell you, when you see this particular pattern, it means this. When you see this pattern, it means that. And the idea is that you remember those patterns throughout the entire test, and you apply them to this fake language that you have. And each of them, maybe a word has a definition, and you have to. So basically, the better you do on that test, the more options, in theory, you have as far as which languages you can go learn going to the Defense Language Institute. So I did fairly well on that. And when I showed up, of course, I believed the world was my oyster. But when I sat down across the table from that chief, he said to me, do you want Chinese, Vietnamese, or Tagalog? And I said, well, I know what Chinese is, and I want nothing to do with it. I know what Vietnamese is, also want nothing to do with it. But what I don't know is Tagalog. So give me that. I'll take it. And so I got Tagalog. That's what was given to me. My roommate had Vietnamese, and then you were in a different schoolhouse entirely from me, but you were still in the same area. So how that relates to Carmel Valley Baptist Church is, none of us had vehicles. Not a one of us had a vehicle where we were. And so it was on foot every place we went. And
I had a bike.
And this one guy. Yeah, well, there you go. So you were one step ahead of us, and you were also brave if you rode it down that hill in front of the Presidio of Monterey, because it was brutal.
Right.
You remember that?
Are you talking about Franklin?
Yes.
Franklin? I rode it down.
Some Franklin, poor soul wrecked on that thing. So yeah,
I rode it. I rode my bike down Franklin all the time, and it was getting back up Franklin that was a big pain in the butt.
I watched a lot of people carry their bikes up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. A lot of walking your bike. I mean, I did ride it up a few times. I mean, probably a lot, but
Yeah.
but in terms of going to Carmel Valley First Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
you would go the opposite direction. You would go through the Taylor Gate, which is now closed
Yep.
since
That's right.
9/11. And you'd go through the Taylor Gate. And I'm not allowed to say my wife's name on here, but I was very happy that I took my wife to the Defense Language Institute to show her around before 9/11. So she saw the way it was when we were there first learning our languages. And it used to be that civilians would drive through all the time. I mean, people who lived in the neighborhood would just drive through the base to get from one
Yes.
side of the peninsula to the other.
Yeah.
It's just a convenient way to do it. And there was no
The city
security
bus
issue.
came through.
The city bus came through. That's right.
Yeah.
And it was actually a convenient way to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And you could walk right outside the Taylor Gate to Campano's sandwich shop, which is still there, and the same guy still runs it, and he claims to remember me every time I go back
Yeah.
there.
Same.
And I'm like,
Yes.
I don't know if they do remember me, but okay. I
He tried to
you.
sell it to me last time I was there.
Oh,
so,
is that right?
I don't know.
He always gives me
Yes.
a free piece of cake. He's such a
Yes.
sweet man. I don't even know
Yes,
his name,
he
to be honest
is.
with you. Do you know his name?
Bennett.
His name is Bennett.
His name is Bennett. Bennett.
Gosh.
Yep.
That's a juicy detail.
Yeah.
Bennett.
That's right. You got to hold on to that.
Bennett runs Campano's.
That's right.
Okay. So then, but see, then you'd have to take the 68, which is sometimes called the Holman Freeway, named after H.R. Holman, who ran a department store, the only department store between San Francisco and Los Angeles for a long time. And it was in Pacific Grove. And there's a Holman building down there still. It's now turned into apartments. But for the longest time, for decades, it was just vacant as far as I could tell. I used to always look at it and it was a creepy building. I have pictures of it. But that would be kind of scary to ride your bike down that, because there was not a lot of room, cars and stuff. And then to be on the one going south to Carmel, that would not be safe either, I don't think. And then you'd have to take Carmel
not a good
Valley
idea.
Yeah. Well, that was quite a time, and we were fortunate to have Lieutenant Plott think he was very evangelical and missional, wouldn't you say?
I would say absolutely. Yeah, he saw it as a ministry to do what he did. And it wasn't just him, as I recall. There was another guy there whose name we were watching. Was that his name, Gary?
Gary, I think his name. I'm pretty sure his name was Gary. I think he had been a navigator in
right.
F-14s or something like that.
Yeah,
F-18s.
mustache. Yeah, so they had kind of a joint ministry of making sure that people who couldn't get to church from the Defense Language Institute had a way to go. And so I don't know how you found out about it, but for me, I found a flyer. They put a flyer on the quarter deck, which is the ceremonial entrance to the building, and I followed the flyer to the bus, and so. My life was never the same. I mean, not just because of meeting you, but also there was my wife. That was different. Yeah. He was faithful to take us out there every Sunday for the rest of the time I was there at the Defense Language Institute, I think. So at least until I got a vehicle, which was quite a ways into the future. So.
Yeah. Gabe, I remember you well as a solid Christian, and someone that was my age, and someone that was, like when you started dating your now wife. I was at your wedding there on Lover's
Yes,
Point.
you were.
Yeah.
Video evidence.
Me and Joe from my class.
Edmonds.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should say his last name, but I guess I already kind of did. Shannon Bullington.
Yeah.
And
there were quite a few folks that I looked back on that footage, and And what was interesting is there was so little to do back in those days that the idea of going to a wedding of somebody you didn't know that well was pretty attractive. So apart from, you all who we went to church with, a lot of people showed up, people I can't identify now. So it was good.
That's a beautiful spot. And that's a wonderful place to be
Lover's
married.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we actually were stationed together first in California, not
That's
Hawaii.
right.
And then later we
That's
were
true.
stationed in the same place in Hawaii. And it seems to me that I used to talk to you quite a bit in Hawaii. Do you have a memory of that at all?
Well, yes, I do. Actually, you spent a lot of time at our house in between your deployments, and so we'd have
That's
you
right.
over for dinner.
That's right.
We even dropped you off to some of your deployments from time to time, where we dropped you off at the tarmac to go do what you did, and then
Yeah.
we worked in similar. We were probably about a floor apart in terms of which
Yeah.
where we worked when we were back not deployed, but yeah, I saw you all the time. We went on hikes together. I've got pictures of you heading up to some waterfalls with us, and so yeah, I'd say pretty much we adopted you for a season.
That's right. Yeah, that was before I was married.
Yeah,
I have very fond memories of that. I was living on Wheeler Army Airfield at the time.
you and me both.
And
Yeah.
I think you were in the housing. I was not in I did not have a house like you did, but I didn't let me pause it and ask if I can ask. Okay, we're back. We're back, and I just had to ask Gabe if it was okay if I told this anecdote because it was contrary to policy at the time. But I was a gun owner in the Navy, and they were registered, lawfully registered. I hated doing it. I hated going to the police department and bringing these. I think I brought the weapons in. I can't remember. How do you do that? How do you bring the? But anyway, I think I registered them. I filled the form out, and I remember being there, and I remember thinking, "Oh, this is ridiculous." They wanted to know how much ammunition I had. I just left it blank, and they didn't even, that was back when you could buy ammunition at Walmart. But yeah, and I was 20 years old too, and I was registering pistols, which is before you're legally allowed to buy a pistol. And they again didn't bat an eye. Maybe it was because I was in the military and they could clearly see, and I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah.
my form says I'm age 20 and I'm registering pistols, and I'm in the United States Navy, and I'm on Wheeler Army Airfield. And a lot of times people don't realize this, so that's why I'm including this little anecdote. Is that I was in the barracks. I was in the Navy barracks. And I know this is a mind bender for people. They're like, wait, you said Army, now you're saying Navy. Well, the Navy barracks, the Navy had some kind of deal with the Army where we had a barrack, and a barracks is just dorms. It would be like being on a college campus, and it's like a dorm in a college campus, except for it's a little bit more serious than that. There's not a bunch of left wing crap everywhere, and there's not a bunch of potheads everywhere. But otherwise, it's like that. And there was a policy against keeping firearms in your dorm. So it's a little odd for me to say this because I'm so patriotic and I love the military and I was so proud of serving my country at the time. But total idiotic policy to disarm veteran people serving in the military. I still don't really understand it. I think it's still, I don't think you can just blame it on Clinton, who was president at the time. But he could have stopped it. But anyway, there was I don't know if there was a policy against there probably wasn't a policy against having them in your house, right? On base if you were married. Or did they have to be
housing? It was okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay to have them in housing, but you could have them, but they had to be registered. And so I guess together we completed a policy between the two of us, but okay to store in. So So yeah, I think together we were legit.
So Gabe stored my firearms in his house that he had on the same base. And then when I got married and I moved off base, of course there's no problem having the guns in your apartment because that, it's America. But that was back before the Heller decision and the McDonald decision, but Hawaii had no problem with that, thank God. Of course, there's a Republican governor at the time, but anyway, but all that to say that Gabe was a red-blooded American even back then, and God bless him for that. And I loved, I trusted him. I trusted him enough to have my guns in his house when I'm gone. And I'm glad I did too, because when I was deployed one time, my department moved me from Wheeler Army Airfield to Schofield Barracks.
I remember when that happened. Yeah.
Do you remember that? Okay. And
yeah,
Matt, I think he later became a master chief, but it was Petty Officer Mike Lester that was in charge of that.
Oh yes. Yep. I remember him. Yeah.
And when I got to my new room on Schofield Barracks, when I got back from my deployment, it was a little bit because I loved that room I had on Wheeler. I had it all to myself. It was a big room, floor to wall ceilings that went, it was probably 12-foot ceiling. It was great. And then I went from that to Schofield Barracks, which was a ghetto. It was like, first of all, I mean, it was seriously like being in the projects or something. To me, that's what I thought. And I get there, I get back from deployment. There's two people I've never met in the room. So I go from having a room to myself, and then there's two people I've never met. I don't know who these people are. One guy has a wife beater on. He's a white guy. He's got a wife beater on. He's drinking like Michelob or something. He's drinking some beer that I never would drink. And he's got these glasses on that make him looks like the Unabomber or a serial killer or something like that. And then there's a guy that's face down on his bed in his underwear, and he's black, and I don't know how he had that big a hair, because I'm not sure, because he must have, I don't know how he did it, but he had this comb in his hair. And he had the music on so loud, and it was some kind of rap music or something like that, but it was so loud. And then all these boxes were stacked up everywhere, and it just had, those boxes said Dean on them. And apparently that's what Petty Officer Lester wrote on my boxes, Dean, because he didn't want everybody to know who these boxes were, because I had so many books and everybody was so angry that they had to move these heavy books. So he called me Dean.
That's
and so anyway, I was only on Schofield Barracks for I think a month before somebody moved out of Gordon Walker's apartment. I think it was Steve Bezo, and I took his place in Makakilo there off base.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
So I was able to retrieve my guns from you at that time. But so then you became a police officer for a while, right?
I did.
You went from being a linguist to a police officer.
Yeah, I did. That was an interesting sort of transition for us because, I got to the end of that tour, and honestly, I still had no idea by the time I got to the end of that tour whether or not I even liked the Navy. I didn't know that because all I'd done is work joint. And by joint, I mean joint service. So I'd only ever worked with, I mean, my supervisors were Air Force, they were Army, or Marine. I hardly saw another Navy person. And so, people would ask me, well, are you going to re-enlist? And I would say, I don't know. I don't know what this Navy thing is. So unlike you, so you were in much more of a deployable kind of job. And so because of that, you did a lot more, you were around the Navy quite a bit more. So they asked me that. I couldn't actually answer the question. And so I said, well, I'll let you know when I figure it out. And then this message came out, all Navy message. And it said, everybody in all of the Navy and all of the different job fields needs to send somebody to go do law enforcement. It used to be on a rotation. So it was kind of a watch bill of sorts that would say, okay, so the cryptologic technician, interpretive community has X number of people in this kind of in the pipeline for this, and they would stay for 3 years, and then they might be replaced by somebody from a boatswain's mate community or from a, gunner's mate or somebody else. And so what happened was we got a black eye as the cryptologic technician community on the whole, because we had not been sending people to that. And so the message came out and said, you have X amount of time to send us people, or we're just going to start picking. And so when I saw that message, I saw and I thought, well, law enforcement's cool. I could maybe see doing that. That's kind of interesting. And so I came and said, yeah, well, okay, send me. And I knew I would go to a Navy base and I would get a chance to be around the Navy. And I would know for sure by that point, is this what I want to do? So I went to law enforcement training in, I actually I requested the duty station of Naval Air Station Fallon, Nevada. There were only 6 maybe openings at the time, and I chose Fallon, Nevada, and I called the person. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, was there a list of it?
Yeah.
Or did you already know you wanted to live in Fallon or for some reason?
Oh, I had no desire or knowledge of Fallon really at that point. All I knew is I had a choice of about 6 places, and they said, and there was no guarantee I would get any one of them, but here, they said, well, here are your 6 possibilities. And I saw them and I said, well, would you send me to Fallon, Nevada? Because in my mind, I thought, well, that's as close as I'll probably ever get to Colorado, which is where I'm from. And so where we're both from, actually. And so I said, well, that's probably the closest I'll ever get to Colorado. Let's do that. And she thought I was, like she'd won the lottery, the person who made the assignment choices, because nobody wanted to go to Fallon, Nevada. And I had no idea what that was about or why. But so then they sent me to law enforcement training, and in law enforcement training, which takes place in San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force Base there. The Air Force runs the law enforcement training program on the whole, and then each of the services kind of joins up and puts their own spin on law enforcement. Okay. But the Air Force is sort of the executive agent for law enforcement training for the all military.
Oh, I didn't know that. So you were in class?
Yeah. So they sent us there.
It was a joint classroom?
No, it was, it took place on Lackland, but all of our training was actually conducted by Navy masters at arms. A couple of gunners mates and things, but master at arms is the law enforcement rating, typically in the Navy. And so they ran the class, and really what they sent me through is called law enforcement specialist training. And so it was everything that a master at arms would go through, minus one class, which was shipboard law, because we were not intended to go on ship and do what we did. It was at a somewhere land. And so I went through it, loved it. I found what I thought might even be my calling going forward for a while. And I did discover after that, boy, I love this Navy stuff. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about that joint stuff, but I love the Navy. The Navy is, I'm all about that part.
But what about the Navy is in Nevada, though? I mean, there's no ships there. So tell people what's in Fallon, Nevada.
Well, I would hate to burst the bubble of the audience here, but what is in Fallon, Nevada is actually, that's where Top Gun actually is. So it used to be that Top Gun, when you think of the movies and really all the beautiful scenery that you see in those movies. Once upon a time, and even at the time of the first movie, it was in Miramar, California. That was where Top Gun used to be. And so there are still squadrons that are in California in various places, but when they show you Top Gun, that's where that was. And so in the middle of the desert, about an hour and a half east of Reno, Nevada.
Okay. So they're not doing their dogfights over New York City? That's not a good idea.
No, it's really a bad idea, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. Independence Day. Yeah.
Why would you want the desert? Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense.
You do know. Yeah.
Now, so was it Top Gun when you went there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
It was, and So full
I know
disclosure, Top
Miramar a
Gun
little bit.
was,
I know Miramar a
yeah,
little bit. It's a Marine Corps base now, and
yeah,
the
that's
reason I
right.
know it is because Gunfighter Tactical was the best gun store in California, and it was right across the street from the base. And we're really sad.
Yeah,
Gunfighter Tactical, we're sad you're gone. But continue. Okay, so it was Top Gun.
yeah, yeah. So Top Gun, it was actually Top Gun while I was there, and that had its pros and its cons. So full disclosure for me, Top Gun is actually what suckered me into joining the Navy. That's what planted the seed initially for me, and
Really, I didn't
so
know that.
oh yeah, I had it in my mind. I'm going to join because so when I went to the recruiter the first time, I said, you know, on Top Gun the movie where you've got those guys on the flight deck of that big aircraft
Oh
carrier
yeah,
and they're
yeah,
dressed
yeah.
in colors and they're waving
Oh,
stuff and they're like doing all these cool things. I said,
oh
I
man,
want to be that guy.
that's
And
awesome.
that
Yeah,
recruiter looked at me and said, "You do not want to be that guy." And I said,
yeah, yeah.
no. I mean, I want to be that guy. I said, "No, you don't want to be that guy." And of course, he looked through his book of what quotas he was going to have to make to try to,
Right, right,
you know,
right.
that every recruiter has a list of how many they have to get
Yeah,
of which type of job field. And so,
they
so he
tried to
said,
get me
"What
to
you want
become
to
a
be
welder.
is you want to be a." Yeah, yeah. He said, "You want to be a nuke?" I said, "No, I don't want to be a
Yeah,
nuke."
well,
I said, "Isn't there math in that?"
yeah,
And he said, "Yeah, a lot of it." And I
exactly.
said, "Well, you
Yeah,
don't want me to
no,
be a nuke."
no
And
math.
so, yeah, so he said, "CTI, you could be a CTI. Yeah, be a CTI." And I said, "What's a CTI?" And he had no idea, but he lied to me and he said, "Oh, James Bond. All the stuff that you see in James Bond, that's what you're going to be
Sure.
doing."
Yeah,
That was not what I did.
yeah. You
None
didn't
of
carry
that.
a little
I never
Walther.
got an Austin Martin or a, yeah,
You didn't carry a little
Walther
Walther.
PPK. No, none of that. Well, yeah, occasionally a 9mm, but that was no. So yeah, that's what was there. That's what suckered me into joining. So when I went there, it was, it was kind of neat to see, neat to be up close and personal too, get to witness some of those things. There's a darker side to those things as well, in that when you fly that fast at the, at those low altitudes and all that, you do end up with your fair share of crashes and things that you have to go as a security department guy. You got to go out to, to watch over and help with the cleanup and those types of things. So there's a little bit of rougher side to some of those things as well. But all in all, apart from being in the middle of nowhere, it was probably one of my best assignments in the military. So
Wow. Did you ever have to arrest anybody?
many times. So it, that sailors find their way into all kinds of trouble. So I can
Well,
say
I know
this much.
that. I
In
know that because
yeah, yeah,
there's cussing in Top Gun.
yeah, absolutely
There's lots of
trouble. So much
cussing.
you see right there, trouble, lots of
See,
trouble.
there you go.
So, so it, what the interesting thing about that area is that the base itself, the total population of the base, when nobody is there from all of the squadrons. So on Top Gun, the movie, where you see everybody comes from all over the Navy with their very best fighter pilots to come there to compete in this Top Gun thing, right? Well, with each of those fighter pilots, those squadrons all have support people that come with them. So
Mm,
it's not just those guys, it's all of the
right.
people that come with them.
Yeah.
So that base would increase
Yeah. It's
from
like
about
Whitney Houston with her entourage. It's the
it
same thing.
exactly same perfect exactly the same thing. So they would plus up from about 1,200 people, that base would, to about 5,000 people overnight, literally overnight. And so when that would happen, our jobs got to be very interesting very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think those were probably yeah, I had plenty of opportunities. I did get to experience some of the some of the arrogance that comes from those movies, and people being recruited by those movies like I was. I
Did you ever
was.
have to arrest an officer?
Oh yes. Oh
Oh man,
yes.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Did you beat him?
Yeah.
Were you like,
No beatings.
no? Oh,
No,
okay.
body cams and the whole 9 yards are actually dash cams, I should say, because back then we weren't that high tech,
Yeah,
but
all right.
we had dash cams and recorders. So,
Did you have
but
to
I
salute
did
them
get
first
told
before
once
you
upon a
arrested
time,
them?
when you approach the car, you do. So it's kind of a strange dynamic,
That is really weird.
if you think about it like this, right? So with a police officer now and wherever you are, if a police officer walks up to the car, the person who looks out the window at them is not trying to determine whether or not they outrank them, which is different about military law enforcement.
Yeah. Right.
You know, they look and they say, well, okay, what do you wear on your collar? Should I pay
Yeah.
attention to you or should I not?
Yeah.
So it does change your verbal judo skills have to become strong pretty quickly in that job field, because you're swimming in deep political waters,
Yeah.
even the lowest ranking person every single day when you're doing that. So
did you ever feel pressure not to arrest somebody because of that?
Well, so a secret about myself is that that kind of pressure tends to push me in the opposite direction. So, yes, there were times when there was pressure for that, but typically when somebody would try to pull that card, it just pretty much concreted me the other direction, where I would say, yep, thank you for that. You just made my decision easier. I might have had some discretion in it, but
right.
Can't do that.
Huh.
So you can't force humility on people, but you can sure try.
So what were the offenses? Too much chewing tobacco in their mouth, or what was it? What was typically what it was? I think I already know what it was.
We did have once upon a time. Well, so it ranged. I would say, like most law enforcement anywhere in any context, domestic violence is something that you run into with some regularity. Not that it's like
That's not good.
not like it's disproportionate compared to the rest of society. It's the military is just a microcosm of society. And so you're not getting any more of any of that than anywhere else. But on a small base like that, you just know everybody. So you get into those things a little more.
Okay.
A lot of times it wasn't even violence as much as it was just, you have people who have been deployed for the better part of 10 years of their marriage, and then you put them back together in a house for, a tour, and they're supposed to know how to play well together and get along and all those things, and that just doesn't come naturally. So you spend some time with those those situations. But when the squadrons came in, it was, of course, they came without family. They came with just other squadron folks.
Right.
And you were a part of squadron life at some point, but the fighter pilot and the helo squadron guys are a little different breed. So when they would all show up at one time. Sometimes the only thing you could classify it as was a riot, because it would always start with name calling, and then it would always devolve from there when you would get large groups of people together with lots of testosterone. It doesn't always work well, but so a lot of stuff like that. Of course, just like anywhere, you dealt with a certain percentage. You had drug related offenses and things, because that's just the nature of, again, microcosm of society. And while it's screened out compared to the rest of society, you still deal with some of that stuff. So, a little bit of everything in the mix.
So Gabe, you finished that deployment there in Fallon, Nevada. You were a second class petty officer at the time?
I was selected for second class petty officer while I was there. And then, as soon as I finished up, I was a second class.
And so you were probably finishing what, year 7? How many years had you finished?
Yeah, no, that's about right. Like I said, I joined in 93, and that would have been around 2000 that I had finished that tour. I was there for about 3.5 years before moving on to the next place. So I had kind of a decision to make at that point. They'd offered me the opportunity to remain in the law enforcement community for a period of time.
Okay.
Because they did. Because Tagalog, as I said, that's what I'd learned going through the Defense Language Institute the first time. Yeah. They had determined that it's what we now call dominant in force, which just means that there are a bunch of people in the Navy who speak that already, so we don't need you, is what it really means. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, we're going to have to do something else with you. So the law enforcement community was pushing to try to keep me. And it was a successful tour. Praise the Lord, I ended up, I was a Sailor of the Year for the Naval Air Station at that time.
No kidding.
Of course, it wasn't even my field. Yeah, that's so it was something. It was. I didn't really realize it at the time that it was a big deal. I just kind of took it as, took it in stride. But then later on, the longer you're around, you realize, well, actually, that wasn't even my group of people, and so. there were some people kind of upset about it, but they were trying to, because of that, they were trying to push me to stay, not in Fallon, but as a law enforcement specialist. But honestly, kind of in the sovereign plan of God, he saw ahead of time what was going to happen, and I might have made that decision. But come September 11th, many of those people who were in the law enforcement specialist field, like I was, ended up basically just becoming prison guards, and in Iraq and things like that. And I didn't really ever have I was an investigator when I finished. I was an investigator for the Navy Region Southwest, and so I loved investigations, and I did not want to go back necessarily into just doing like garden prisons and things. And so, I don't know. You remember Bill Cowan?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Bill contacted me and gave me options, is basically what he did. So
I remember him. I'm having a hard time remembering what his face looks like exactly, but I do remember him well. I don't know why I can't remember his face exactly right now, but if I saw him, I would be like, oh yeah. But let me ask you a civilian type of a question. If they're listening, most people are civilians listening to this, and they're trying to keep track of what you're saying, and it sounds very interesting. But why is it that the Navy would bring you up to be an investigator, which sounds kind of like an important thing, and it sounds like it requires some experience? And why wouldn't they just, capitalize on that and then continue you on growing you in that skill set? Why would they knock you down to being a security guard? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is, as a law enforcement specialist, instead of being a part of what the law enforcement community in the Navy is, kind of the alphas in that community are the master at arms. The masters at arms those are the people who joined the Navy as that job field, just like I joined the Navy as a foreign language guy. Right.
We already said master chief, but that's a rank, but this is a job. Okay.
That's right. So that's when you see that, actually the first time I ever heard that was from He-Man, Masters of the Universe. They actually had a master at arms in there. But that community, they get top priority. So it was kind of a big deal and strange that I took Sailor of the Year from that. And that's in part because I was competing against people who were actually supposed to be in that job field. And so, because I was not a master at arms, I was still a cryptologic technician when I was doing all of this stuff. They owned me. The cryptologic technician community had ownership of my rights, if you will.
That's the CTI. So, you mentioned CTI before, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Language person.
That's right. And that stands for cryptologic technician interpretive. So I did not cease to be one of those. And I think nobody probably anticipated that I would end up kind of rising through the ranks within that thing during that tour, self included. I didn't think that I would either. But I just took to it like a fish to water. And so when basically I would have started, they'd have kicked me back to the bottom of the ladder as soon as I moved to a new duty station. And so, they would have said, great, get on you with this experience. That's all wonderful. But now you're a newbie again. You're not one of us. You need to go back down to this, to this other, kind
so
of
it's a systemic
field. So,
it's kind of a system problem. It's not really any person that's an idiot. It's the system as it's designed is kind of an idiot.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And they don't even do, it's absolutely fair. And they don't even do that program that way any longer, where they take people from other job fields. And I think in part that's why, they just force converted. So basically took everybody from whatever jobs they were. If you wanted to remain in law enforcement, they would just force convert you into the law enforcement community permanently all over again, and be at the bottom of whatever they had for you, because you were not part of the initial flock, if you will. So they don't do that anymore. Now it's just all masters at arms if they're, whatever job it is that you're doing.
So Gabe, we're about an hour into this, and I'm assuming you're still married at this time. You're married.
I
You're
am.
7 years. No, I mean, yeah, but in Nevada, you're
Oh,
coming to
okay.
the close of your tour,
Yes.
and you're married. How long did you stay in the Navy?
So I was in the Navy for 22 years, and I think it's probably more appropriate to say we were in the Navy for 22 years because
Yeah.
honestly, that's a lot of why we were able to put that many in. Is just we were
Yeah.
both in. So
And you were married for about 21 years of that. Does that sound fair to say?
yeah,
Or
that's right. We maybe more. So
more?
and I'm not advising this to any listener who's out there, but my wife and I met there at the Defense Language Institute at the
Yeah.
same time as we first met Lucas.
Yep.
We married within 3 months of knowing each other, and we've been married ever since. And so I basically have I have hardly known even time in the Navy without
Yeah.
without my wife in it. So yeah.
What was it about your wife that, well, she wasn't your wife at the time, but what was it about her? She was was she in an Air Force uniform when you met her? She was in those camo or whatever she was wearing, the blues. Was she,
No,
did you know that she was in the Air Force?
no clue.
Okay.
I just knew that she had somehow been delivered straight from heaven, and so I just determined, I saw her sitting there waiting, didn't know for what. I knew I was waiting for the church van to pull up and take us out, and as I said, I told my roommate who was standing watch, "Hey, I'm that girl over there. I'm going to marry her," and he laughed at me and said, "Yeah, whatever. You haven't even talked to her yet," and and so she ran from me for about probably 3 or 4 weeks, and then after that, she finally gave in, and we, I couldn't say I couldn't have been any happier to find out that she was getting on that same bus to go to church with me at the same time because as a follower of Christ, I was looking for another follower of Christ, somebody who felt as strongly as I do about my relationship with the Lord. And so she's been an absolute rock since that point. And, it took her a while to come around, but when she did, 27 years coming up on 28, it's pretty good.
Yeah. And I'm having a memory. I'm not sure if it's a real memory or not. But I had two roommates when I was at DLI.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I lived on the third floor for the first part of that, and I had a view of the bay, the Monterey Bay. And then for most of the time there, lived on the first floor. Both of my roommates, I only had one at a time, but both of them were Hebrew linguists.
Yeah.
And the first guy, I don't even remember his name, to be honest with you. I just remember he was tall and he kept to himself and he was kind of weird. As opposed to all the other people at DLI who are not weird.
Right. Yeah.
But but then I had Nick Carter as a roommate for a long time. And Nick, I think, was in Elizabeth's Hebrew class. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly, but I know
No, I
that they
think
were
that's
both
right.
in Hebrew. So
I think that's right.
Did she finish Hebrew?
She made
Did
it.
she graduate? Wait.
She did not graduate, but not because of anything to do with with her aptitude. She was actually knocking that thing out of the park. But when we had decided that it was time to get married, she went to, and this just goes to show you a complete, it's a change in the times basically, but when we decided to get married, we knew we were going to different places. She was in Hebrew, and so that meant for her as an Air Force linguist that she was going to go to England at the time. What that meant for me, what my job, where I was supposed to go, was to Guam, and that was those aren't too close, and there was really no place for us to be together except for Maryland. And so my
She was going to
detailer,
go to
the
Menwith
person,
Hill.
that's right.
Oh.
Yeah. and the person the detailer, who's the person who sends you where you're going to go when gives you orders to go where you're going to go once you graduate of school, told me, well, if you get married, then maybe we could get you together. That's a possibility. So we talked it through, and they, her tech sergeant, which is an E6 in the Air Force, so kind of a somewhat senior person when you're that new to the military.
Sure.
She had a conversation with him and said, we've decided we're going to get married. And he said, well, we're not going to be able to station you together if that's the case. And she said, well, I think I need to get out then, because this is the guy I need to be with, and I know that I need to be with him. And so he said, well, I don't think we're going to be able to let you out. And she actually said to him words to the effect of, I don't think that's really up to you. And so she told him that she believed that this is what God would have, and so if that's what he wants, that's what's going to happen. And sure enough, they ended up just letting her out of the Air Force to marry me and go with me to Hawaii, where we got to hang out together, the lot of us. And so yeah, she has been a rock in terms of our time together and our service. And I absolutely could not have done what I did if I did not have somebody, that supportive of me throughout it. So, yeah.
I knew all those details, and now I'm just getting refreshed on them. And it's amazing to me. That story is very powerful looking back, because it's not normal for people to spend that long a time in the military. Actually, it's not normal for people to spend that long in the time in the military. Actually, I think a lot of people get out, but the people that make a career out of it, I don't think it's normal for them to be married so long and to have been married. And I was at your wedding. I mean, I saw you guys, you were like kids. We were all just kids.
Absolutely.
I was such a scrawny little thing, and you were scrawny little thing, and everybody was a scrawny little thing. And we all had our lives in front of us. And for her to make that decision at such a young age, and for you guys, what I think of you, when I think of you guys, I think of you guys as stable. I thought of you as stable back then, and every time I think of you, I think of stable now. That's why I trusted having my guns in your house. I was like, this is a stable family. And you guys were such a joy to be around whenever I was a single guy at the time in Hawaii, and that's how I remember you guys, in an earlier stage in Monterey. What was the secret to, is there a secret? I mean, I'm sure you're going to say there's no secret, but I feel like there is some kind of secret. There's got to be something. Is it just your personalities? Is it just you're on Zoloft or something, like an extra dose of Zoloft, or what's the other one? John Harwood was reading this book there called, I don't know, it's had some drug in it, like it's a pharmaceutical. But what is it?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of ingredients in there, and I mean, I'd be remiss if I did not start by saying that Jesus is probably the first key, because honestly, there's a principle that I think we inadvertently followed, even from that time. Because for me, I only came to saving faith in Christ at 14, so that was only 5 years before we got married. I grew up around the church, but I was not, I basically was just sort of a fan, like an admirer, standing on the sidelines kind of thing, saying, I believe in a God. But I watched God transform my older brother's life. And when I watched that, that became a reality for me. He was an absolute thug. And so watching God do that mighty work in him, I thought, okay, this is not, we're not just talking now this is not theory. Now I'm watching this impact on the life of somebody that should have been probably in prison at some point. And so for me, I'd only been a Christian for 5 years at that point. Beth had been for most of her life. I mean, she was very young when she decided to follow Christ. She was maybe 5 or 6 or something along those lines. And so she's kind of had there's a book that that's called, I'm trying to remember who it is that wrote it, but it's basically called A Long Obedience. And so she is kind of the definition of that for me, a long obedience. And so that was probably the first key. But then there are a couple of things in my life that definitely impacted that. And that would be, so my parents divorced when I was 5 when they divorced. And for me, my father was not present even after that. I mean, I saw him probably once every couple of years growing up. And so for me, and really even for my older brother, he's been married for, about a year longer than I have to the same wife. And he's a law enforcement officer. So, similar kind of context with a lot of strains and stressors. But for us, I think you got one of two things that can happen when you see some sort of a tragedy in your life. It's either that it's like you're riding a bicycle and you look at something on the side of the road, and it's either that you go out of your way to avoid it, or you look right at it and you just drive straight toward it inadvertently because it's pulling you to it, whether or not you're actually logically, considering that. And so for me, it was the avoidance. I saw that train wreck, and I'd been through that before. And so in my life, Beth and I endeavored right at the beginning of our marriage just to simply, you know what, we're not, no matter what kind of disagreements we have, we're not going to bring up divorce. We're not even going to have that word come up in a conversation. So let's just agree now that's not coming up. We can have all kinds of different options. There can be, any number of things, but that's not going to be one of the options on the table. And so I think there is a certain element of just refusing to quit in that and just work through those difficult things. I think we live in a little bit of a disposable society that is willing to walk away quickly from things when they get tough. She was not. And so she's been, I can't tell you, I've always been, the greatest person, the easiest person to get along with. I mean, you don't become a senior chief by always playing well with others. And so, that could be the reason I didn't become a master chief. That's a different story. But, I do think that, I think that some of that stubbornness in addition to what we just our faith and our values that we held deeply together, those probably combined to make that.
I hope Beth is listening to this eventually in the future and feeling the love. And I wanted to make sure I went back to something I might have inadvertently cut you off on, which was, what did you think when you first saw her? I got caught up on what she was wearing, and I want to go back to that.
Well, and I can still remember what she was wearing. She was wearing an almost full length dress with lots of flowers, and purple was the color I remember within the flowers. And so I just remember thinking there was something about her that automatically called me to her. And the funny thing is, and this is not, it's not intended to be arrogance. I was an arrogant, little punk when I was young, but the reality is, and I think that's why God took my hair, if I'm going to be frank about it. But I think, the reality was, up to that point, I never had to chase anybody. Like, that was not I didn't worry about that. Like, I was used to being chased. And so it was kind of interesting that, okay, I feel like you hear those stories all the time where it's like, oh, love at first sight. No, that's what that was. In fact, that night after we finished that ride, I called my mom and I said, I met the girl I'm going to marry. She doesn't know it yet, but I met the girl I'm going to marry. And sure
did you
enough,
talk to her?
So,
I mean, what was that like?
Oh, yeah.
First conversation like?
Well, I tried to talk to her on that little mini bus thing that we were on, and she talked a little bit, it was a Volkswagen van. Do you remember those little old, late 60s, maybe, Volkswagen mini van kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And I tried a bus.
This
I
is
guess it was a
classic
bus.
California right here. This is
It
classic.
totally was.
Yeah,
Yes.
you and me remember a classic California that changed after 9/11 or something. I don't know what happened with the internet and cell phones, but there were do you remember there being newspapers? I think we got to pause for a sec.
Yes.
Are you back? Okay.
I remember newspapers.
Yeah, there were newspapers, and when you had to call your mom, there was a payphone. Remember that? In the DLI
Yes, and a
barracks?
line. Yes.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Yeah, and
that's actually where I was. Yeah.
There were TVs in the lounges, but not in my room. I didn't have a TV in my room. What are you talking about? Let alone a computer.
Yeah.
I had a typewriter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had like paper to write a letter, and I had stamps. So that was, we were right up. That was when we were right up. There was a Republican governor, Pete Wilson. There was, it was a very different California in many respects. And little did we know how much the world was going to change. But the Volkswagen bus on the way to Carmel Valley Baptist Church, that, first of all, that church is not, I don't think it's the same church. It's the word Baptist isn't even in the word in the title of the church. I've been back many times.
Nope.
And I'm always suspicious of a church when they take the word Baptist out of it. I'm like, what are you doing here? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Their first Baptist Monterey didn't do that, I notice.
No, they did not. That's right. Yeah. Sanctuary Bible Church was the last I knew it was called at once upon a time.
Well, at least they have the word Bible in it, for gosh sakes.
Yeah, that's right. It was, in trying to talk to her, it was not an easy conversation. She really was kind of not having it. She was interested in another guy, another Navy guy that lived in another place that was from her hometown. And so it took a little bit of warming up, and eventually, she saw the light, and that can only be divine, because clearly, I was not doing it of my own power. So
maybe you should have wore your dungarees to the church service. That might have gotten her.
That could have
those tight
bell bottoms,
those tight bell bottom jeans with up your butt crack like that.
Mm-hmm.
That might have
flotation devices.
So you guys ended up having kids?
We did. The both of us together. There were three of them, still are. So we have our oldest daughter's 26. We are grandparents. So she and her husband have three children. So this is, we've got one who's 3, one who is 2, just turned 2 this past couple of weeks ago. And then one who was just born prematurely, but he's now just a little bit past when his regular due date would have been, and he's healthy. So
what's that like being a grandparent?
Surreal. If you had asked me if I would be, we were parents so young. Our first, I think you knew us when Beth first, I was about 20. She was about 22. And, our daughter, she got married around the same time as we did, and has had kids back to back to back. And so it's kind of bizarre, but I can tell you, it's one of the coolest experiences on the planet. So highly recommended, 5 stars, 2 thumbs up.
And one of your daughters ended up being in the Navy and going back to that language school, right?
Actually, that same daughter, she joined the Navy, and I didn't really expect it. I'd never really enjoyed people who pushed the military on their kids, because I taught at the Defense Language Institute years later, and
I remember I came and visited you.
Folks. Yeah, that's right. And so I remember. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I ran into
remember
Master
when
Chief Burger. He was
Oh,
a
yeah.
silly villain. He had been my
Yes.
boss at the time.
Yes.
And he remembered
Yeah, he
me.
was great. He was a good well, he's one of those, mind like a steel trap kind of guys. So he's great. Always, I would say one of my professional mentors for sure. But one thing I couldn't stand when I taught there was when you would get people who were children of prior students there. A lot of times they would be children of very senior people who had then come back later in life, and oftentimes they were very entitled. And so I was not interested ever in pushing my kids into that. Of course, they knew that I'd served. They understood the context mostly. My youngest one, to the least extent, because one time he actually asked me, he said, "Dad, aren't you in the Army or something like that?"
Oh,
And
no.
Wow.
Wow.
I was like, well, I guess I hadn't done as good a job as I probably should have of educating them on all that. But yeah, I didn't push it. And so when she came to me and said, "Hey, I was actually, I love language. I think I'd like to go to the Defense Language Institute." And I said, "Well, you write your own story. If this is what you want to do, then you do that. I will be just as proud of you either way, but you do it." And she did. And basically I just told her, don't tell anybody you're my kid, not because I'm embarrassed, but I don't want them to, I don't want them to feel like they owe you anything, or like I want you to make your own path. And so the only person I told there that she was going through was Rick Berger. And I just said, I just told him, keep an eye on her, just for her own, for her own safety and that kind of thing. But from a distance, she doesn't need to know, just like that. And in fact, he did, he'd send me every once in a while, he'd send me an update and let me know kind of how things were going. But she did well. She graduated, like, I think maybe top of her class. I think she ended up Hebrew, just like her mother.
Just like her mom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think she ended up with a
that gives me
Commandant's
chills. That gives me chills thinking that.
Yeah.
I mean,
me too.
It just gives me chills. Wow.
Yeah. Sometime let me show you a picture sometime. I've got a picture of being at her graduation. It was probably the last time I was in uniform. And
were you active duty when she was there?
No, I had just retired. And so since I had just retired, I was still in enough shape that I could still, stuff myself into a uniform. So I shaved and, put on the uniform and went as though I had been. So,
gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like being retired from the Navy? What kind of, do you have any duties is there anything you have to do or?
No.
Okay.
No, there's no forced connection anymore. Any connection that you choose to keep is kind of just your, to what level you're comfortable. And I can tell you, when you ask that, I actually wrote an article on this once upon a time, because, writing is how I process things that I experience. And so I wrote after I got.
You want to share how people can read that if they want?
Sure. Yeah. There's actually, I've got a blog that is on WordPress, and it's called Cross and Anchor Reflections. So if anybody'd like to read anything on that, I have a few reflections on leadership, quite a few reflections on basically a spiritual walk. A couple of things even on the Denver Broncos. I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan, so there's a bunch of things on there. But yeah, I wrote an article on that to process that, and honestly, there's a grieving period that comes when you retire from something like that, and in essence, it's very similar to what I would feel divorce to be when you first come away from that. And everybody kind of walks through that at a different pace and in different ways. I tried for a bit when I went back to Georgia, where I was kind of around that same community, to engage in things like, senior enlisted trainings every year. When new people are selected, of course, in the Navy, you go through a multi-week training process to help people transition from their prior pay grade to a new one. And I was always a really big part of that. And in fact, that played a large part in my, my love for learning and development and training. And so, I tried to go back to some of those things. And I think, you experience pretty quickly a couple of things, and they offset. So it was good. One of those things is a feeling that I'm out of place. This is no longer my home. You can't go back to that. But the other thing I experienced as I looked around the room is I recognized that many of the people in that room who were in the senior leadership positions and training other folks were people that I had trained and I had brought up. And so there was a passing of the torch that I was able to just kind of put closure to that and let that go. So that all took for me a few years probably to process through to where I felt really good about it. Other people, they never leave it. They basically retire and go straight into a government job and work side by side with all those same folks. And so they just can't pull themselves away from it to do that. But yeah, for me, that was kind of my process on that.
Gabe, I appreciate you sharing all this stuff. This is great stuff. I want to reconfirm the name of your blog is called Cross and Anchor Reflections. Is that right?
That's correct. That's right.
And you write that under a pen name, so people are going to not see your name, Gabe Morris. What name will they see?
Well, there'll be a couple of things that you might find on that. I mean, so Gabe Morris is on there, but you'll see something that says Blue Ridge Bronco.
Okay.
Blue Ridge Bronco is another name that sometimes I write under because I do write some stuff for sports related things. A few things here and there.
What part of Denver are you from?
So I was born in Thornton. That's there at the hospital, and then I grew up, of course, in Salida, Colorado, in the mountains there near Monarch Ski Resort.
Where did you go to boot camp?
Orlando, Florida. At the time we had Orlando, San Diego, and then of course Great Lakes. And because I was in Colorado, they just said, where do you want to go? Pick which one. I mean, either one works. And I was one of the final companies to go through Orlando before they shut it down. So
I was one of the final ones to go through San Diego before they shut it down. We had the Marine Corps on the other side of the fence.
Logistically, I understand why. Yeah, right. I'm sure. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, logistically, I get why you go with Great Lakes. But yeah, that's right. Come on, guys. Yeah. We just, I mean, Orlando was hot, but either Orlando or San Diego beats Great Lakes any day of the week. I mean, in terms of climate, you'd much rather have. But
I was in boot camp about a week after I graduated from high school, something like that. It was the summertime.
Wow.
Well, senior, we've kind of skirted around what you did in the Navy, and that's because it's mostly classified.
Yeah.
And it's highly sensitive stuff. And those of you listening are interested in this, you want to check out Captain Will Palmer's episode where he goes right up into the line. And I don't think he went over the line anytime during that time, but he's a captain in the Navy. So, I mean, who am I? But it's the same issue there. But how would you describe what you did for most of the time, not the law enforcement side, but
sure.
How would you describe what you did after that and before that?
Yeah. So before that, I would say, that's the time that we spent together, and most of what I did during that time frame was what I would call intelligence reporting. That was most of my job, writing stuff down. So maybe that was the beginning of my love for writing. But I would say after that, I when I did come back to the community, interestingly, in the community, I mean the cryptologic technician community as opposed to the law enforcement community. Interestingly, they sent me back for Arabic. And so when they sent me back,
why would they do that? Well, and never mind.
Well,
they're sure there's a good reason for it.
Right. And so what's funny is, so they sent me back for Arabic, and I was in Arabic language school when September 11th happened. I was actually a student there at the Defense Language Institute when that happened.
How many dialects of Arabic are there, and how does that feature into your basic language training?
Oh, so I mean, there are. I couldn't even tell you the total number of dialects. I mean, there are as many of those as there are of English, and I consider, of course, all of the dialects across the United States to actually be genuine dialects of English. So I would say, yeah, there are at least that many. What they sent me through is what's called Modern Standard Arabic. And so Modern Standard Arabic is kind of, for those who aren't aware, if you were to turn on a news channel in any place across the Middle East, even today, that's what you would likely be hearing is some form of Modern Standard Arabic. Religious texts are often in a very similar form, Modern Standard Arabic. Politics are handled in Modern Standard Arabic, so it's a higher level. But the reason that you would have that as a common thread through all of these is that the grammar is the purest in Modern Standard Arabic as opposed to any of the others. And so if you can understand that well, once you learn kind of the distinctions between, kind of like in the United States, once you learn a couple of a couple of colloquial phrases and things like that from different areas, well, then, you can pretty well use your basic understanding of English to navigate any place across the United States. You might just have a couple of things you needed to brush up on. So that was kind of that was the prevailing philosophy for a while. So they sent me through that. And eventually that's what I came back and taught. I would say that by itself took up, between teaching and going through there, that was about 5 years of my career right in and of itself, was doing that.
In Monterey. Was it back to back? You went through as a student and then you taught, or?
No. So I went through as a student, and when I went through as a student, I actually went to submarines, and I did that job on submarines. And so basically, to kind of stay in the friendly territory, really, the main thing is you are kind of doing indications and warning is what you would call it. So what that means is kind of just monitoring to protect the fleet from any kind of potential dangers that they might run into. And so if you were to deploy a bunch of linguists with a particular large group of American war vessels, the reason that you would do that is because you were potentially going to be in areas where there would be people who don't like you. And so you just want to put some smart people on there who can tell you if you're in danger. Is there something we need to be concerned about? And so, so that's really a lot of what's entailed in that. I've done that job. So that was submarines. After that, I have a stint that is a dog leg, which I was accepted into an officer program, and then bowed out intentionally in the middle of that when I was selected for Chief Petty Officer.
I never knew that.
Really.
Hold on, I never knew that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting.
You were accepted.
That's an interesting story.
Which officer program was it?
Well, it's called, it might be called something different now. At the time, it was called Seaman to Admiral.
Oh yeah, that's what Will Palmer had.
That's right. So yeah, there were quite a few that, yeah. So I was accepted that program, really, and it was the kind of thing where my evaluations were strong, and my I was being awarded regularly and all those things. And so it just seemed like the next logical step. Everybody was saying, "Hey, you should do this. You should really go do this." I mean, so I did. I took their advice and I applied for it, not really thinking that I would get it. But then I was picked for it, and so I went to. Of course,
you would have been a petty officer first class, which is an E6, which is a staff sergeant in the Marines or Army, tech sergeant in the Air Force. So
that's right.
This is one lower than a chief.
That's right.
And you were up for chief at the same time?
That's right. I was.
So then the question was, are you going to go ensign, which is what the butter bar is right out of the Naval Academy? Or are you going to be chief petty officer? And
that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes. And so there I was with that decision to make. Yeah. Both decisions I didn't expect to actually have to make. I probably underestimated what God had allowed me to accomplish to that point in my career. And so I didn't really think that that was going to be a realistic possibility to go to the officer program. But when they selected me, I went to the University of Colorado. And so, speaking of academics, I was in Ward Churchill's class, if you remember about Ward Churchill during that period of time after
You went to
9/11.
Boulder?
Yes, I did.
Gabe
Yeah,
Morris in Boulder?
yes, yeah, it was a fiasco to say the least. I mean, I did well academically. That wasn't an issue at all. But
What was your major?
it was. So I was actually majoring at the time in international relations, and
I've heard of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a big thing, but so I did that for a while. It was about
You were in
I
Ward
made it.
Churchill's class? Okay.
Yeah, I was.
The
Yeah,
white guy that thinks he's an Indian?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the guy who he
All right.
wrote that, gosh, what was the article called? It was something like When Chickens Come to Roost or something like that.
So.
But yeah, it was a bizarre kind of season. So I went into that, and
Did you
one of the things
graduate?
that happened. No, I got close. Eventually I ended up getting a degree, but I was on the 13-year bachelor program, the 18-year master's program. It was a lot of life happening in between all of that stuff.
What year was this? Just so
This would have been 2000, probably 2003, something like that, 2003 to 2004, sometime like that.
Okay.
So I had already had some credits going in just from a couple of community colleges here and there, wherever I could pick up something. I was doing stuff, and of course, military credits that whoever would take them,
you probably
I would
had
do.
like 5,000 credits or something.
That's actually kind of what it was. I had so many, but none of them were in the same sock, and so I was like, well, what will you give me for? I felt like I was bartering. What will you give me for this? I mean, I've got this stuff. Will you take it?
Right.
So actually, I got quite a few out of there, and I was probably about a year from graduating completely from them. And I had an executive officer. The way those things work, it was an ROTC unit. The commanding officer of the ROTC unit was a Marine Corps colonel. And so that's an 06 up there, pretty high, pretty big deal kind of guy. And then the executive officer was a Navy commander, so an 05. And, the way it works there when you're in these seaman to admiral programs is they put you in a fake kind of officer uniform, and you get fake military ranks on your collars, and then you wear all the ribbons that you have that you'd earned up to that point, and your warfare devices and all the stuff that you have. And then you hang around with a bunch of people who are not far off of your children's age in some ways, and so I thought, okay, well, this is a season I can live with this. I have been shaping and molding young officers from my current position for a while now, so I feel like I can probably do this. Well, that executive officer, she sat me down my second day there, and she said, she was looking over my performance evaluations, my reviews, and she said, well, I see on here that you were a leading petty officer on a submarine, for a period of time. Yes, ma'am, I was. And I see that you were a leading petty officer at your last duty station where you were at. Yes, I was. And she went through all my different accomplishments, and she said, okay, well, she put my review down and said, none of that means anything anymore here. All of these people are your peers. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I can get the humility aspect that she is kind of going for on one hand, but on the other hand, I'm doing a disservice if I'm not training these people with what I know, because I've been doing this for a while and I can actually help them to be better at what they're doing. She said, I don't want you to mentor them. I want you to just be their peer. And I thought, I'm not sure that I can do that. So of course I disregarded that order and mentored them anyway, as I had opportunity to do so. And we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but that commanding officer,
she sounds like a real idiot to me.
Oh, she was not a gem. She was somebody who I think was kind of bitter maybe, and was kind of put in that place against her, maybe what she would have preferred. And that colonel was a phenomenal guy. And so we got to those chief results came out. And do you remember Devin Mayer?
No.
So Devin was from the same group as you know, your same language family and all.
Okay.
And so he was there with me at the same time, also in E6, also, you know, petty officer first class, and he was also up for chief, and we were both in this program together. And the results came out, and he was on the road and didn't have access to them, and he asked me would I look at them so that I could tell him whether or not he'd been selected, because he was kicking around what would I do if I had been selected, you know. And so I looked on there for him, and I saw that I had been selected and he was not. So of course I had to deliver bad news to him on that front, which has turned out fine for him. He retired as a lieutenant commander in 04, and it was fine.
Oh,
But
well, hold on. Let me stop you right
yeah,
there. So what city is this meeting taking place in? Is it in Boulder with the 05, the idiot?
yeah, that's in Boulder. That's right. Actually in the stadium there at the University of Colorado Stadium is where the ROTC unit is. So, you know, so I was
It's in the stadium, really?
It is. Yep. Yeah. There are offices underneath the bleachers there. And so it was,
No kidding.
that's where the
So it's
unit
like
is.
like Rudy's running around mowing the lawn and sleeping there at night.
Exactly like
Actually,
that.
it's the
Yeah.
wrong school, but yeah.
But
you know.
premise is the same. Yeah.
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 Okay. So you're in Boulder and you're with these college kids who don't know anything.
Mhm.
Not really. And she's telling you, don't share any of your wealth of information from the actual Navy.
Yeah.
And
That's exactly what she said. Yeah.
she's saying this is a Navy officer too.
That's
And
right.
in Boulder, which is like
Yes.
the epitome of I wouldn't say stupidity, but I would say, because there's a lot of smart people in Boulder, but I would say it's a wisdom vacuum.
Yes. Yes.
So you know, it's I can and so you're taking classes and then the chief results come out and you make chief.
Yes.
Do I have all that right?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You're
Okay.
tracking.
Okay.
Yeah. So I find that I've been selected for chief petty officer, which in the Navy is a really big deal. And
Yes,
honestly,
it
to
is.
that point, I hadn't considered what that would mean to me. I hadn't considered the impact it would have on me when I saw that. And
Hmm.
so as soon as I saw it, the first thing I did was I went up and talked to my wife and I said, so you're not going to believe this, but, and she just knows me well enough. She just knew. And she said, what are you going to do? And I said,
Hmm.
well, I don't know. I'm going to pray on it. That's what I'm going to do. And so I did. And, and basically what it boiled down to for me, I mean, obviously the armed services need good people at all levels. You know, they need people who are strong leaders at all levels. But
That's
what
why I stayed at the
typically,
lower ranks as long as I could, because we need good people down there.
yeah, that's exactly right. You do. Absolutely. And so what I had done is I basically, I prioritized in my mind what was it that drove me in my service. You know, we'd already talked about a couple of those things. My relationship with the Lord is one of those things. My devotion to my family. When it came to what I loved about the Navy, though, it was mentoring younger sailors, building up the next generation, passing the baton to
Yes.
somebody who was ready to do that. And so that's what it boiled down to. And you know, and not everybody listening to this would know, but the role of a chief petty officer as compared to the role of an officer, that's one of the primary distinctions. Your job is to develop up and to develop down. That's what makes you kind of a unique position in the military services. And so I determined this, okay, yeah, maybe I'll disappoint a few people, but I've got to do this. I have to go that route. So I went back to that same on.
There's another issue that maybe people are not aware of.
Yeah.
And I'm not a total idiot on the Navy, so I'm aware of this, but feel free to
Yeah.
correct me if I get this wrong, okay? Because it's been
Yeah.
a while. But
Yeah.
there's an issue of if you were to become an officer and go be a butter bar, that you wouldn't necessarily be in the intelligence field at that anymore. You know, you might be a line officer driving a ship somewhere. Whereas if you went to become a chief, you would be in the intelligence community still doing, you know, maybe well, what we called special projects, or sometimes called
Yes.
special operations.
Sure.
And that could potentially involve special warfare operations if you were qualified to do that, stuff like that. Whereas you might be, this came up when I talked to Will Palmer, Captain Will Palmer, where he drove ships. He learned how to drive a ship, which is, it might not be what you want to do, but so did that factor in at all? And feel free to correct me on any of that if I have it wrong.
No, you're actually correct in terms of how that often works. Now, so in Seaman to Admiral, and they eventually called it Stay 21, so STA-21, so the 21st century, and then Seaman to Admiral. So the way that works is you have two different routes you can take. One of them is when you make your application, you say during that choice, I'm either going to just accept whatever commission you give me, or I'm only going to apply for something in a particular field. And so your options are more open to you if you say, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. And your chances of selection are increase exponentially.
Okay. That's a very good way you described that.
That's part of why I was so surprised that I'd been selected that's part of why I was so surprised I was selected, is because I told him I'm only doing this if I get to stay in cryptology. And there were only like 2 spots in the entirety of the Navy to do that. And so I thought, well, I'm limiting my options here. So if this is going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen within these parameters, And so I was selected to do that. I was supposed to go be a cryptologic officer. I did. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so
that's a big deal.
I would have.
Okay, everybody listening, that's a huge deal. You that's a huge deal to get one of those slots instead of being unrestricted line, which is unrestricted line means you're learning how to drive the ships and eventually be an XO and a CO of a ship. You're in line to do that, and eventually you're in line to be the chief of naval operations.
That's right. Yep,
and be in the White House. Briefing the president, but you decided to stay you decided to tell the Navy, I'll do this if I can stay in my field that I'm in now.
That's right.
And they said, yeah, well, we prefer to tell you what to do, actually, Petty Officer Morris, but we do have 2 slots for that, and that's in the whole Navy, and you got one of those.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so knowing that, right, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of a question of, okay, I probably took that from somebody who really wanted that, and so I had to, that weighed on my mind as I was kind of thinking through this. And, of course, now after I later ended up in personnel, I know that my vacating of that then opened it to somebody else. So it's not like it actually, like it was taken. It just meant one of those other people then got a chance to do that. But still, once I had determined, okay, I need to be a chief. That's what I was designed to do. I need to be, a chief. And so I went to that same executive officer's office, the one that told me don't mentor people. And I sat across from her and told her the story, what I was going to do. And there was a form that she was supposed to sign to let me drop from the course. And I don't recommend this person for future, commissioning programs. And one of them was that I'm fine with this person applying for future commissioning programs. And I did not have a desire to have a future commissioning program. That was, I had no desire to have a future commissioning program. However, the principle of the thing was, so I told her as much. She said, I'm not going to mark here that you can be, you can have future commissioning programs because you're quitting. And I said, let's get this straight. I am not quitting. I said, your program did not beat me. I have a 3.97 GPA. There's nothing about this program that was too hard for me. I'm making a conscious decision to go serve sailors. That's what I'm doing. Wow. And so he signed the paper angrily, sent me out of her office. And so the very next stop was to go next door to that commanding officer's office. He had to sign the next part on that piece of paper. So he'd heard already what was going to happen. And so I went to the door, and of course, in those environments, it's for students, so they want you to do all these facing movements, all of these fancy things to, to position yourself just right and to look very professional in front of them. And I walked in and started those things, and he said, no, knock all that stuff off. Just come here. So I went there to have a seat. So have a seat. He said, give me your paper, and he looked it over, and he got to the part where she had marked that I wasn't recommended for future programs, and he pointed at it and turned it to me, and he said, are you content with this? And I said, no, sir. And he said, I'll be right back. And he stood up, walked out of the office, walked around to the other side, and I heard a dressing down like you wouldn't believe coming from the other side of that. And he came back with a different mark on that paper. And then that was kind of it. And he said to me, he said, based on what I've seen from you since you've been here, you made the right decision. He said, yeah, carry on. Thank you. And so then I became immediately available for orders, because I was somebody that they were not expecting to have access to in the enlisted community anymore. And so they said, well, you got two choices, and both of them involve you going unaccompanied to Bahrain. So I went to Bahrain for a year and a half unaccompanied, meaning an unaccompanied for those in the audience means that's without wife and children. So I had, at the time we had actually all three children, but my youngest was about 6 months. And then, so I had to go unaccompanied as a result of that decision. But ultimately it was where I needed to be. And thank the Lord, I had a wife who was supportive enough to, to back that play, knowing eyes wide open what that was going to mean. So
you went from Boulder to Bahrain in like 2.5 nanoseconds.
Yeah, that sounds like a book, but yes, I did. As a matter of fact, go from Boulder to Bahrain.
You went from crap class in Boulder to right in the thick of it. And
that's
did you put on Chief right away? Where did you go through your indoc for Chief?
I went through that actually in Aurora at the
Buckley.
Oh goodness, there is an Air Force base there at Buckley. And there's a Navy element at Buckley. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Buckley.
Yep, that's where I went. Okay. That's exactly right. So yeah, that's what happened. And then basically I transferred right away to Bahrain from that point, and did the same type of indications and warning support. So, but from there, I actually, although not aircrew, you'd be so proud, I served on what we called temporary flight orders. They had not enough aircrew people to do the job. And so they said, hey, I know you're here on surface orders, so surface vessel orders, but would you consider flying with us? So they sent me back to Pensacola to go learn the very basics, get dragged across the top of the water and dunked in a helo dunker. And
you did? Wow.
For those, yeah. Oh yeah. So for those in the,
did you go to NAS Pensacola for that, or where'd you?
Oh yes, I absolutely did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So for those in the listening audience, the helo dunker is an attempt to drown you multiple times so that you can find your way to the surface. If you happen to get submerged. So it's a lot of fun. No, that was the thing. No, I didn't. No, I went to what they call, I think it was called SEER C or something, which is just a watered down version of it. The if you get caught behind enemy lines, how do you react thing, which was a little different. So
okay.
Oh. Yeah.
Sorry that you missed SEER. That's a one for the books. But the helo dunker, man, that's I still think about that one. That's a good training. So you when you were doing subsurface operations, do you want to say where you were stationed for that?
Sure. I was in Georgia, but what happens when you do? Georgia. Yeah, that's right. What happens with subsurface operations with cryptologists? You're not what you call ship's company. So that means that you don't live on the vessel year round, or with the crew of that vessel year round. Instead, what happens is you are gathered together with smaller groups of people and sent all over the world to join up with wherever those vessels happen to be. To do those jobs. And so,
were you on an Army base? Were you on Fort Gordon?
Yes, I was. Okay. Yep, I was. And then, but yeah, obviously the extent of deployment that happens from that is that you get in an airplane, and then after that you get you get flown to undisclosed locations all over the world and dropped into the middle of the ocean and you know, join up with people.
Literally.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, did you get your dolphins? I mean, I already know the answer, but yeah.
Yes, I did.
What's
yes,
dolphins for people?
Subsurface warfare qualification is what it is. So it's
a big deal, people.
Every
this is a big
vessel. Deal. Yeah, that's right. Every vessel type, major vessel type in the Navy has associated with it a warfare qualification, and what that really, the real intent behind the whole thing is to ensure that everybody on that who is qualified in that way knows the vessel well enough to be able to keep it afloat in emergency circumstances, to be able to go to the appropriate battle station in case something happens, war related while you're on that. All of those are a part of the warfare qualification, and they involve everything from engineering specifications of that vessel to damage control responsibilities on that vessel. All of those things kind of come to bear. So on a submarine, it is an engineering marvel, and there are so many different elements to you. Typically, just an idea. In order to qualify on that, at some point you have to have memorized, if I'm a drop of water in the ocean, how do I get from outside of that vessel to drinking water within that vessel? And it's a very long process that it goes through to get that to happen. Or how do I go from becoming a drop of water to becoming electricity within that vessel?
Right.
And all of those things are traceable. So you have to know all those things, and you sit on a board where people, similar to what you do in a dissertation, more or less, where you're doing a defense, and people grill you nonstop for them.
Right.
So yeah.
And what do you feel comfortable saying which ship you earned the dolphins on?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. So Connecticut, the USS Connecticut was what where I was when I earned that.
Which Virginia class? What is that?
No, it's a Seawolf class submarine.
Seawolf class.
Yeah, there are only a few of those out there. So,
can you say what a Seawolf class submarine is?
Well, it's a fast attack submarine, similar to what you have.
Oh, it replaced the Los Angeles. Okay.
Yeah. It augmented it. Yeah, it augmented the Los Angeles class. I did deploy in a couple of Los Angeles class as well, but the Connecticut was the one that I was on when I qualified.
I just now realized that. I'll tell you later something about LA class Pac Fleet combatants that I served on. So that's a big deal. Now, you were a chief in Bahrain without your spouse. That must have been tough. How did you guys get through that?
Yeah, it was tough. We don't have, obviously back then we didn't have the same types of communication methods that we have now. I mean, you had something similar to what you have with Zoom nowadays, but it was not, even just the time difference alone when you have 3 kids and all that kind of thing makes it a little difficult to even carry those on. I did make it back about every 6 months. One of those was because of that temporary flight order school in Pensacola. So I got to go back and get drowned. And then because of that, they let me see my family for a little period of time. And so that was.
Where was your family living?
Yeah, they were living. So that's kind of a blessing of that circumstance. And it's one of those things, again, when you can look back and see, okay, God's hand was in that. And that was, of course, my wife's family is from Kentucky. And there is no place that you can be stationed anywhere close to Kentucky in the Navy for the most part. And so, when
recruiter.
Yeah, that's right. Which, you might as well be deployed if you're, one of those in many circumstances. But we, when we got sent, or when I was sent to Bahrain, the Navy actually said, so we'll pay to send your family wherever you want them to go, wherever.
Wow.
And so. So we said, well, there's an Army base there in, near Elizabethtown, Kentucky, which is Fort Knox. And so, we said at least she'd have, military there and her family's from Kentucky. Let's send her there. So we did. And we did not know this at the time, but her mother, who had been in remission from cancer for years, shortly after that, it took a turn. So she got to spend that year and a half there near her mom, and then her mom passed just after that tour was over with. So so it was really a kind of a sweet arrangement. You see sometimes God will choose things for you that you would never choose for yourself, because he sees the bigger picture. He sees the end of the parade, and so he knows what that means for you. And while you might not select it, it's for your ultimate good. And so that was definitely one of those scenarios that we looked back on later and were able to go, man, that was miserable, but man, God is good. I can't believe he pulled that off in spite of all of those negative things.
So she had family around then?
She did.
Okay.
They were probably, I guess they were about an hour away down the, Bluegrass Parkway there.
Beautiful state.
But pretty close. And so it is. Oh, it is. It's a gorgeous state. But yeah, it was hard. For me, it was easier probably than for her, in that I just stayed busy all the time. Because I had no family, I just stayed at work until 11 o'clock at night. And then I'd, come home and go back to work at, 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And so, for me, it was just like a long deployment.
Gabe, did you ever get depressed?
Yeah, I think you do when you're out there by yourself, and thankful for, you don't realize how close you are to other military people, until you're in that foxhole situation where you're just out away from all your support structures, and you really have to rely on people.
Yep.
So I will say I did not end up getting depressed like I'd seen other people get depressed, but I would attribute that largely to my faith. Not because of me, and not because I'm special and I have great coping mechanisms. I mean, sure, I could say that probably a difficult childhood in some ways contributed to to some of those coping mechanisms over time. But I would also say that if you don't have anyone you can go to with those concerns and those feelings and those problems, well, that's where it typically ends up snowballing, is that if you just feel like there's no out and you have no way to talk to anybody about those things. But people would think I'm nuts, the amount of out loud personal prayer I probably am involved in without realizing it, and I think that probably saw me through in a lot of ways.
Are you doing Bible studies, or were you going to church while you were in Bahrain?
No, that was actually kind of that was like I would say sort of a vacant spot for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I was doing self, study, but in terms of like groups of other Christians, there was a chapel on base, but it was, it was not, not the kind of chapel that I would typically have gone to, even in the States or anything with my family. So I did feel very much like I was kind of left to, to navigate those things by myself. I don't think there was actually there wasn't another Christian in the entirety of my
Wow.
my unit at that time. So
Wow.
so
how many people were in the unit?
Oh, I mean, it was a relatively small one by comparison. So we're probably only talking 100 people. I mean, if that, and of course that includes some people that were maybe deployed aircraft and things like that.
Okay.
But I come to think of it, there might have been one other guy, but again, I was a chief and he was a first class. And so you've got those kind of barriers that exist that you got to be kind of mindful of. And so, it's, that was probably one of the more challenging aspects of being there, is just the lack of fellowship in that way.
What was the weather like?
Ridiculously hot. At night, it was commonly above 100 degrees at night. And we hit over 120 several times actually during a couple of week period. And you'd basically just hop from shade to shade as best you could, but it was miserable in terms of heat and humidity there.
So for people that don't know where Bahrain is, it's in the Persian Gulf. It faces basically Iran.
Yep.
behind it is what, Saudi Arabia? What's behind it?
That's right.
Okay.
It's attached, yeah, to Saudi Arabia.
Okay. So they give you a sense. It's
by a
below,
causeway.
it's it's below Iraq. And it's
That's
above,
right.
yeah, Yemen. And okay, so you could look at a map, so when you come out of Bahrain, where do you go from Bahrain?
Yeah, so from Bahrain, I got, because of those orders, it was kind of one of those situations that you see in movies happen all the time that doesn't really happen that often in reality, which is, well, you did this hard thing for us. Now, where do you want to go? And so, that became kind of a reality for me because of those, having taken those 1.5 year orders. Even though I didn't really have much choice, it was my choices were: do you want to go for a year and do air crew, which was 6 months worth of training that I would be gone from my family anyway, or do you want to go for a 1.5 years and do, surface in that? And I thought, well, okay, surface doesn't require extra training. I mean, if I'm going to be gone, I'm going to be gone. So let's do it.
Yeah.
But in any case, when we were done with that, it was, where do you want to go? And so for me, I'd always loved training people. I've always loved teaching people. I've always loved investing in people and trying to help people become better at something than they once were, whatever that thing was. And so, so I just asked, hey, my language scores, you test in the language field, you test annually for your language.
Were you still testing in Tagalog?
Yeah, I did. Yep. At that point, I didn't need to. I just did it because there was money incentive to score a certain number. So, so I did that. But you have to score pretty well to teach those languages. And I had the scores to do it. And so I just asked the guy who sends you from one place to the other, the detailer. I said, do you have spots at the Defense Language Institute? I'd like to teach. So it was like Top Gun, that thing where they get to the end and they say, it pains me, but now you have to go teach it.
In this situation.
Yes, with less hair, because that actually was when I first shaved my head. I came home with no hair. I left with hair, and my wife was shocked beyond words, probably, that I came home with no hair. So, but a bald maverick, yes. So I asked to go to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, to go teach, and so the guy that made the decision on those orders, turns out he was actually going there to become the senior enlisted leader for the Navy element there, and so he said, yeah, okay, we can pull that off. And so I went and worked for him for a while, and taught there for about 3 years, close to 3 years.
What was his name?
Lauren Bailey. I don't know. Okay. You remember him? Yeah. So he's retired since, but I worked.
That's
for
when
him
I came and visited you when you were there.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah. You came out to visit.
Yeah. So you were there for 3 years. Is that right?
About that. Yeah. I think maybe a little shy of that. Just because of another special set of orders that came along after that. So
what happened after that?
Yeah. So after I finished teaching there, which, by the way, was probably the most stressful job that I had while I was in, if you think about all of the shenanigans that every student you were with was involved in, and then maybe multiply those by 15 years or whatever the difference was between, a lot had changed in 15 years in terms of what shenanigans people could get into. So they kept me very, very busy. It was, it was a very high, it's teaching, but you're responsible for every aspect of their life on top of that. So you cut them loose from your class, and then you go and you monitor them to make sure that they shave and that their clothes are on right and that they don't do dumb things and all that kind of stuff. But then after that, when I finished it, I kind of had always had an interest in becoming the person who sends people from one place to another, and the detailing job. So I said, I'd like to apply for that job, and it's an application job. It's something you have to process, you go through. So I applied for that job and went through the interview process, and they selected me for it. And then I went to Millington,
chief
Tennessee.
at the time?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a chief at that time, and and then, yeah, so I went and did Millington, Tennessee, which is Navy Personnel Command, and then worked as a detailer, sending people from one place to another all across the the world of foreign language specialists. And
How
and it
big of
was
a community is that? So people have an idea of kind of what the administrative aspect
roughly
is.
Roughly 2,500 ish, something like that, people is what you're looking at from the enlisted side, which is what I was responsible for. So I started that job off with responsible for the E5 and below group. And then I finished that job out as responsible for the E6 and above group, sending them from one place to another.
So there's two detailers?
And then, yeah. Yes.
I don't think I knew that
Yeah,
there were two detailers. Oh.
Yeah, yeah. There's there. I don't think there used to be when we first started off. I don't think we were big enough to warrant that, but it got to the point after a while that just too many people for one person to manage well. So they
Was that your last tour then?
It was the last assignment. It was the last duty station, I should say. I was promoted to senior chief during that tour, and then during that tour, like toward the tail end of that tour, an opportunity came up. There was a guy that I had worked with in the detailing job. You may know him because he went to school with us, Barry. Armstrong. So yeah, he went through for another language, but it was something in the Asian language families. But he was there as one of the detailers with me, and he had taken a job with the Navy Bureau of Personnel, which is in the same location, just in a different set of buildings. And they handle a little different stuff. Most of what they do is like big picture human resources for military. So determining how many people will be promoted, determining how many seats you need for whatever schools you have as a community, determining what attrition rates you need for your schools in order to achieve the graduation rates that you need, determining all of those elements. That's Bureau of Personnel. And so big long range planning type stuff. So he moved from detailing into that job. And then he wanted badly, when a job opened up in Korea for him to go do, it was a master chief job. He was a master chief, and he wanted badly to go do that job. And so an opportunity came up for him to take it, but he would have to find somebody to take his job at the Bureau of Personnel to do that. There were no takers from the Master Chief group. Nobody wanted the job. And so he, as a last ditch effort, asked me. And again, just another act of God's sovereignty in the middle of that. My wife had been praying for some opportunity that would somehow keep us there to allow my daughter to finish high school, because we've dragged her all over, and she had been in the same high school for most of that time because of this tour, and really didn't want to pull her for her senior year to go. And so it was just, last ditch effort, praying that God would do that. And so, same day, this guy calls me up and says, "Hey, nobody will take this job. Would you be willing to take this job?" Mm-hmm. And so I said, "Let me call my wife and talk to her about it." And I called her, and she was silent, super quiet. And so I kind of pried out of her what's going on. Well, I just prayed that God would open an opportunity for us to stay here so our daughter could finish school, because she was wrecked about having to go. Our daughter was, and so it happened. He called, and so we said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do it." So I took that job. It was an E9 job, wow. And I was an E8, and so I took that job and made decisions for the community on a big picture level up until retirement. So.
Wow. So you stayed in Tennessee for 4 years. Is that right?
Yeah, a little over, actually. I think it was probably closer to 5 years by the time it was all said and done, because of that extra wow. Tour in that spot. So,
and you were doing a job that was one rank above you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I retired, I was.
And that part of Tennessee, is that near Memphis?
Oh yeah, okay. It is. Yeah. I mean, you can't quite throw a stone and hit Memphis, but Memphis is spreading, so you're getting close to being able to do that. It used to be a naval aviation training base, and then they repurposed it when they moved the headquarters stuff from DC out there.
So would you say that staying there for 5 years was an answer to prayer?
Absolutely, it was. Yeah, not necessarily my prayer. There were a lot of things about that I enjoyed, but there were things about it that I missed kind of being around, having sailors and things as well, because I was mostly administrative at that stage.
Did you wear a Navy uniform at that job, or were you
Yeah,
wearing?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
How many answers to prayer would you say that you saw during your time in the Navy?
Oh, innumerable, but I mean, there are several. I kind of refer to those things as Ebenezer stones, in a sense, that you just kind of go back to those moments where you can see that God heard you, that he answered your prayer, and that he'll do it again. So it's those moments that, when you hit those places in your life where you go, I can't see how God's going to deliver on this particular thing. And it's odd, but it's human nature that no matter how many times you've seen him do that before, you'll be gullible enough when the enemy starts telling you he's not going to do it this time. You'll buy it. And you need to have those moments to go back to. And so when I experience those, I try to make a point to tell them over and over again, because that's what they did in the Bible, told those stories over and over again to their children and the next generations, because they build your faith, they strengthen your faith, but they also give expectation to those people that you share them to, so that they recognize, oh, I know these people. These people aren't nuts. These are people who watched God work in their life. And so he'll do that for me too. And so, yeah, it's innumerable, but it's just, there are so many times where it's happened and always been in a way that I can't take credit for. It's not ever been because I'm so great. And if everybody else would just do it like this, it would work out that way. It's always been, okay, let me knock out all of your underpinnings so that I can then make sure that you understand that this is of me and not of you. And so that's the place we come back to over and over again.
When you say the enemy, what do you mean by that? You mentioned the enemy.
What I mean is Satan. I mean Satan
exists?
I mean the Bible tells us that absolutely, 100%. Okay. I do. And I think, the Bible even tells us that we're not at war just with the governments and all of these things around us. It feels like that sometimes, but we are actually, it's a spiritual battle. This is something that's going on at a much deeper, bigger level than what we see. So
how would your Navy career have been different if you had not been a Christian, do you think?
Well, in some ways it would have been a lot easier. There are, and I say that because there's a popular view of Christianity. And by that, I mean, in churches across the United States, there is a gospel that is being preached that tells you that somehow suffering is not congruent with what Christ preached while he was here, that suffering is somehow somehow separate from what it means to be a Christian, that you would prosper from being a Christian. But prosperity by God's definition and God's economy is different than it is by the world's economy. And so, the way that we experience prosperity when we are followers of Christ usually involves eternal reward. It doesn't involve necessarily monetary gain, or, that you'll promote, or that you'll make a lot of friends, or all of those things. In fact, if you actually read scripture, Jesus goes out of his way to tell us over and over again the opposite of that, okay, if you follow me, things are going to be tough. It's not going to go easily for you. You're going to have a rough go of it. And so, so I would say, yeah, it would have been easier from a worldly perspective to just give in and go along to get along. I will say that there are elements of military service, and probably also in the academic world, there are elements of military service that we have somehow become arrogant enough to believe originated with us, principles, values, those types of things that we would believe. We would say, oh, well, yeah, they didn't exist until 1775 when the Navy, came into existence. But the reality is many of those things I was able to adopt easily because they were scriptural principles before they were ever, Navy core values or principles. And so in that way, maybe easier. I lost your audio.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you give us an example of that? What do you mean by that? Like how?
Yeah. So
example.
Yeah. So, integrity is a good example of that, right? So you will hear in every military service, in every leadership course, they will talk about integrity, and they'll talk about it in a way that makes it sound like it's original to them, and that, you've never heard this before, but it's important for you to behave like this. Yeah. Whereas, you and I know that as somebody who follows Christ and reads scripture, okay, integrity was around long before even Christ walked the face of the earth. Integrity is integrity because God defines it, and so we know what it is because we've seen it first in God. And so that's just an example of what you might, we've adopted, but it's in fact a scriptural principle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. What would you say as we wrap up here? I got a couple more questions for you. If someone was thinking about joining the military, a young person, you spent your first career there, what would you say to that person? Mm-hmm. Any advice if they were going to listen to you, what would you say?
Well, I guess in some ways, I would have to know where they were coming from, because one thing that I'll say is, the military is not for everybody, and I would not just try to convince anybody to join the military. I wouldn't. Many of those, when I talked about that one tour being my most difficult tour in many ways,
Monterey,
a lot of that's right. Yeah, instructing in Monterey. A lot of the reason that was so difficult is because there were so many people, and I say so many, but I mean just percentage wise, there were a large number of people who were there because of what they could get. They were there because of maybe education benefits that would be paid to them for having, enlisted for a certain amount of time. They might pay your college loans, or, something that you'd signed in your contract. Maybe you would get an enlistment bonus. Maybe there would be just reasons other than your why. And I say that because if you are in it for those reasons, then when it gets tough, everybody around you suffers. Everybody around you will pay for your selfishness. And I say that because, not to shame people for wanting to join for those reasons, but only to say it gets really hard at some point, and those reasons aren't big enough to serve as your why when it gets tough. So I would say you had better, if you are joining, great if you get those benefits, but if you're going to join, have a deeper sense of why, than just those monetary benefits or those temporary benefits, or because I just didn't know any better. And I'll be honest, I did not
Rick
have
Berger
a very
didn't he just smack the hell out of these people? Because he was my boss at one point. So if everybody listening, my boss, a decade and a half almost before this, he was now a civilian working with him, and this guy was a hard ass. He took a perfectly good air crewman like me and put me in special operations, and I was like, what are you doing? But he thought that was perfectly normal. Anyway, but was he not involved with that? Was he too high up?
Well, he could not. So first of all, the times have changed. And so some of those things that you could get away with back in the day were not so much a part of that anymore.
You can't hit them anymore?
No, there's none of that. There's no hitting. And in fact, like not even dropping for push-ups. You can't do that anymore with people. So so it is it's a changed scenario. The game is different than it once was. And so, you know, it becomes even more critical because of that for people coming in to have a reason to buy in, you know. And for me, what I can say is,
how do you
yeah, go ahead.
discipline them? How do you,
Well, that's a good question. And a lot of this, it comes from, and let's be honest, right? Knowing what your why is helps me as your leader to understand how to hold you accountable. Because, you know, if you happen to be one of those people who, you know, who is motivated to do what you do for some sort of an altruistic reason, whatever that happens to be, like it's that, and I'll tell you mine, right? So initially, I'll be the first to tell you, I was the guy who joined the military because I had no clue what I wanted to do. I had no idea. I told my dad, I'll waste your money if you try to, you know, send me to college. I'm not ready for that. So I did that, and I was a punk because of it. But I can say, when you know why, for the Lord, that was my primary sense of why. But then even kind of trickling down from that, you know, my family was part of my why. You know, I looked at that as, okay, I'm going to do this because doing things in this way honors the Lord, but then it also honors my family, whether it's you want to say your family name, whether it's you want to say, you know, whatever that reason happens to be for you. When you usually need to discipline them, but when you do, it's easy to bring them back because you can just kind of remind them of their why. When you have those people who are there for the money, they're mercenaries. And so that's why that was such a stressful assignment for me, because, you know, when you're just there as a mercenary, that makes it more important to you. Like the person next to you doesn't mean as much to you as they ought to. You know, and that's part of what I would tell somebody is, know your why, have it solidified before you go in. And if your why is only selfish means, then wait, don't go yet. Don't do that yet. You'll probably cause somebody, you know, pain.
And some whys are better than others.
That's exactly right. They are. Yeah. They're not all created equally. You know, and they morph, like I said.
Why is better?
Well, you know, I think part of it is, if your why is important enough to you to affect change in your behavior, whatever that happens to be. Again, if it's family for you, because let's say you're an agnostic and you come there. I recognize full well that while I believe firmly that that Christ is something that all people will have to come to, he's someone that all people will have to come to reckoning with at some point or another. I recognize not everybody is in that place. And so I'm not going to say, hey, I want a theocracy and everybody ought to, think like I think and do all of that. I mean, it's a narrow gate for a reason. But what I will say is, if your why is family, for instance, and it causes you to think twice before you do what you do, then it's having a positive impact on your behavior one way or another. If your why will pull you back from the brink of doing something stupid, it's having a positive impact on you one way or another. But if your why is the kind of thing that to you is disposable, whatever that happens to be, again, if it's a monetary value, if it's again, like I don't know why, I don't know why I'm doing this whatsoever. I'm just here because it's a paycheck and I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's something that, you could probably find something else to do, and you could probably find somewhere else to be. Most of these kids, as you know, are really smart. They may lack other skills, but they're really smart.
They are.
So they have options.
That's right.
But I think that's really the difference.
They're usually smarter.
Something big enough.
Yeah, they're usually smarter than their character has developed. Their
absolutely
mental capacity in terms of just smartness is outpacing their character and their integrity.
Amen.
What would you say to someone? Here's a slightly different question, but other side of the coin. On the marriage issue, you've been married and you weathered 21 years of marriage in the United States Navy. Not an easy task, to say the least. I know your wife gets a ton of credit for that, but how in the world, okay, so if I was a young person and I wanted to ask you, how do you stay married for so long? How do you make it work? Do you have any advice? And if I was willing to listen, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's a little bit similar to the last question that you asked, and I kind of would say, so military service. When I compared my separation from the military earlier to divorce, I think there are some similarities in the two, in that there is a relationship that you are entering into in that sort of thing. Um, and and the why is equally important in both of them, so I would say in marriage, if you don't share together the most important why in your life, then you're already starting off at a disadvantage. And so, for instance, if you find, and of course, scripturally we talk about that as being unequally yoked, and that's meant in terms of of where you stand in relationship to the Lord, each individually. However, a yoke being that thing laid across the back of two ox, right? And they're, if one's uneven, then somebody's carrying the bulk of the load and getting worn out, and somebody else is getting away a little easier in the whole thing, and they're neither one of them benefiting as much as they could be in that. So I would say a similar thing in marriage. If you're not both counting in our case, the Lord is most important, then one of the two of you is going to, and rightly so, choose the Lord above that, above that relationship at some point, be forced into that sort of situation. You don't want to end up in a scenario like that, because the reality is, if you both have that same priority, then instead you're both chasing the Lord. And so as you're both chasing the Lord, it's a triangle. You're both going up and closer at the same time, so that you end up at the same point at the end of the whole thing. Whereas if one of you is headed off this direction to the on this trajectory, and another's heading off in this one, there comes a point where that line is too tight. You can't maintain that any longer, because the distance between those two lines is just too great. And so I would say growing together in those things that you mutually agree at the beginning are most important to you, is a key point. And again, I would just say, just practically speaking, in a day in and day out basis, it's similar kind of to the military thing, in that we vowed not to use that term, right? Just not to pull up the concept of divorce, not to have that as an option. I had a similar mentality in the military. It was, after I got through those initial stages of trying to figure out what I was going to do, when I determined that that's where I was going, it was okay. I'm not considering the option of getting out at this point. I've committed to this, right? Whatever that is. So I would say, commitment in a lot of ways is just burning the ships. Not giving yourself the option
There's no plan B.
Not giving yourself the option to go back. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
You got a lot of wisdom, man. I really enjoy listening to you. And I've enjoyed catching up with you. And I know that you have a lot more to share, and maybe we'll have you back if you want. I especially really love listening to you talk about just the faith and what you've learned through all of this, because I've known you so long, and it's just I feel like I'm still talking to the same guy. That's the weird thing, everybody. I feel like I'm talking to the same guy that was 20 years old or 19 years old. And I know you've matured a lot, and you really have, actually, and so have I. but
we can hope, right?
You're just like the same guy, and that's what I love about it. And so we thank you so much for spending all this time sharing your incredibly interesting career. Thank you for your service, Senior Chief. And it's a big deal. what you guys have been through. We thank you both, Beth as well. And I enjoyed this time.
I did too. Thank you so much. It brings me great pleasure to be able to say Dr. Mather. So thank you, Dr. Mather, for the opportunity to join you on here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.